Chris Voss, thank you for calling me today.
Cassius, my pleasure, man. It's fun to be on with you.
Absolutely, thank you so much. I know there's a ton of stuff to talk about, and a ton of stuff to get to. So I guess I really want to go back and sort of start from the beginning with you because you're a really fascinating person. I know you had a long, lengthy career in law enforcement in New York City. It landed you in the FBI. I guess the first question is what sparked your interest in sort of law enforcement and anything sort of related to this?
I saw a movie when I was 16 years old about a couple of police officers in New York City called the Super Cops.
Hmm.
And I was blown away at how creative those guys were. It's a true story. They were creative, they had a lot of fun. They arrested a lot of bad guys, and the community loved them. The community loved them for the work that they did. And I was just, that combination of all those things, it seemed to me like a great life.
Hmm. Yeah, so you saw like the admiration and you said maybe I can service my community and also get respect.
Well, yeah, I wasn't really that worried about respect. Probably, I mean, secondary consequence, being respected is important to me. But just do some good and have fun doing it. That was really what appealed to me: the creativity, doing some good, and having some fun.
Right. And I would imagine that through your teenage years and everything, you had different jobs probably to support you. Did you try many other things and did it just really feel like it wasn't for you?
Now, well, first of all, I grew up. My father was an entrepreneur, had his own business. So, yeah, you had different jobs, but they were all for the same guy. Everybody worked
Mm.
for the old man. So I grew up working in my dad's business. I had occasionally I might have, I might fill in at some other place, but it was an entrepreneurial environment, entrepreneurial, blue collar, figure it out. So
Right.
that being said, I thought my experience working was varied.
Okay. So what type of entrepreneurship was he doing? Was it just all types of stuff?
Well, now he had the name of the business was an oil jobber. He was a middleman between the big oil company and the end user. So, and it happened to be for the vast majority of my life, it was Shell Oil. So, you buy a jobber ship, you have an area, and then you make it work. And he distributed to gas stations, I grew up in Iowa, so large farms and small industries. So
Okay.
it was, you had to learn how to, you learn plumbing, you learn everything. I mean, whatever needed to get done, you figured out how to get it done.
Right. So hearing that, it might have made a lot of sense for someone in your position to just stay in the family business, but that's not what you wanted to do.
Yeah, no, well, I got bit by the bug for law enforcement, and my father was a tough guy, hard to get along with, and
Okay.
so and he like a lot of small entrepreneurs, they're very driven and work really hard, and some he had trouble hanging on to employees because he expected as much out of them as he was willing to give, and the guy worked really hard. My son grew up working for my dad also. And to this day, we joke about, if you work for a guy that he would never ask you to do something he wouldn't do himself. Never. Nothing was beneath him. But nothing was beneath him.
Mm.
So, you had to jump down into a hole that was filled with nasty stuff to clean it out to make something work. He had no sympathy for you if you didn't feel like doing it.
Wow. So it was like it wasn't a simple job, it sounds like.
No, you had to be prepared to adapt to anything. It was blue collar work, hard, very much. It wasn't working on a farm, but farmers are hard workers, man, and they got to figure it out. They are on their own.
Right.
So it was very much like that.
Wow, that's super interesting. So you mentioned the law enforcement bug. Of course, you described how you caught it. At that point, were you wanting to be a police officer, or were there FBI or other aspirations at that initial point?
Yeah, all I ever wanted really to be was a street cop. I mean, it never even occurred to me to be in the FBI. I didn't know one federal agency from another. FBI, CIA, that's all federal alphabet. I didn't know those guys.
The Alphabet
I,
Boys.
yeah, yeah. I wanted to be a cop. I wanted to be a cop in a major city. The cities that were close to where I grew up were Chicago, St. Louis, and Kansas City, and I settled on Kansas City initially.
Okay, and then you relocated there and you got started.
Yeah, I just drove down there, put in an application, got hired, When they hired me, I drove down and stayed in a hotel for about a week looking for an apartment, and just went down and figured it out.
Okay, so what was it like when you first started to join the force? What was your experience like?
Yeah, no, it was great. I mean, most police academies are kind of like going to college. It was with a physical component and with a firearms component. I mean, the FBI Academy was the same way. Very much like going to college with a physical defensive tactics, working out component, and a firearms. Learn how to shoot a gun, learn how to be in shape. The police academy was very much like that. The police academy happened to be held at a local community college.
Hmm.
So yeah, it was just like going to college. I mean, you had classes, you studied, you had to make grades. We had defensive tactics every day on a PD. Kansas City Police Department then and now, a very progressive department.
Okay.
So we spent a massive amount of time on non-lethal force and not hurting people. How to subdue someone physically and not injure them. Massive amount of time spent on that, Kansas City. So yeah, it was a learning environment. It was challenging.
Wow, that's really interesting. Was that something that you expected, or did you expect that it might be more the lethal training?
Yeah, well, I don't know that I had any expectations. The fewer expectations you have, the more open you are to what happens.
Right.
So I don't know that I had any expectations. And then everything about the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department impressed me about how progressive they were. So in hindsight, actually, at the time when I joined the FBI back in 1984, the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department had a more sophisticated computer system than the FBI did.
Wow.
That's how progressive KCPD was.
Holy smokes, that's incredible. So they had the technology and the training.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, very sophisticated on both those aspects.
Wow, very cool. So once you were going through your training there, what was your experience like when you first started getting out in the field?
Yeah, well, I loved it. I mean, I was open to learning. If you got to be, it's actually a trait. It's called coachability. It's all openness. Are you open to be coached? You can be tested for that. There's a 5-factor inventory psychological instrument that can test to see how coachable you are, how open you are. And I think, if anything, I'm open to learning. A competitive advantage is to be open to learning, to be coachable. And I was always very coachable. So I got out on the street. The officers around me, my commanders, they knew that I was there to do the job. And so consequently, I had a really long leash. I mean, I got assigned to just unmarked cars on a regular basis, where they just say, go out and fight crime, so to speak.
Right.
Because they knew that I was ethical, I'd follow the rules, I worked really hard, and I'd do the right thing. So I got a very long leash early on because I was trustworthy.
Okay. Wow, that's really cool. And I'm curious, you mentioned your moldability back when you were working with your father, and how you were, even in the department, very open to learning. Do you find that there were any skills that transferred into your law enforcement career from that?
I think, just initiative and adaptability.
Yeah.
Both of those require two things, and they require both things. They require people take action and they don't learn, or they take one action. I mean, we let somebody do some work for us recently, sort of as an audition, and I was blown away at how quickly they were to take action. But then, as soon as you take action, there are results, data, if you will, indicators of how successful you were, and you got to adapt. And so this consultant took action and then was not interested in the feedback, because the feedback from the environment was their action at best was mediocre. And a famous American general, later politician, Colin Powell, said, "Never let your ego get so attached to a position that if the position collapses, your ego goes with it."
I like that.
Like, if you think that you had an answer and you tried it out and you weren't right, well, you're going to cling to, no, give it more time, give it more time. If somebody's saying give it more time, they're refusing to accept the fact that what they did didn't work. And so you take action and you learn and you adjust. And so if you're adaptable, you got to learn in the moment. So both things are very important.
Right. I can totally see how that would transfer just from doing all the hard sort of hands-on work. So how long of a career did you exactly have on the police department as an officer? And at what point did you start thinking, maybe I want to get deeper into this?
Well, I was there just over 3 years in total, counting my time in the police academy. Mm-hmm. And my first assignment on the police department was in a mostly commercial area. Okay. And I liked that a lot. There's a lot more activity. It's a little more fast-paced. It's not really in-depth work. There are a lot of people on the street. You know, you're trying to sort out who the good guys and the bad guys are. And I like working there in the high crime areas. Yeah. And I loved it. And after I was there for about a year, they rotated me to another precinct that was almost all residential. Now that's a different kind of work. It requires a lot more patience and meticulous detail. I'm not particularly meticulous. You know, I'm not a fingerprint examiner. I was a SWAT guy. I was a negotiator. Right. You know, we need fingerprint examiners. We need evidence techs. You know, they're incredibly meticulous. They're incredibly patient. Yeah. So when I got transferred to that precinct, I was unhappy, and I was bored. It wasn't what I was built for. And there were other police officers, you know, that it was perfect for them. They loved it. Not me. Right. So after I'd been there for a while, I was getting a little bored, and my father wanted me to look at federal law enforcement because he thought that was a step up, and he resigned himself to the fact that I probably wasn't going to leave law enforcement. So I started looking at the feds, mostly because my work had slowed down for me. First, I looked at the Secret Service. They weren't hiring, but the FBI was, and you know, I put in, and it was perfect. I mean, I was lucky. Fate had that path in store for me.
Wow, that's incredible. So in terms of joining the FBI, what exactly are the qualifications that you have to have?
Well, qualifications are pretty simple. They're pretty minimal to qualify. And at that time, and it's still pretty much the same, real basic is a minimum of a 4-year college degree, minimum of 3 years of work experience, real world experience. So, you know, even though I hadn't been a cop for 3 years, my academy time counted, so I got to my 3-year mark relatively quick. Right. If you got an advanced degree, they might consider taking you with 2 years of experience, but it's a real life experience-based job. So anybody that came in with, you know, I mean, it was tough to make it with 3 years of real-world experience. Right. And there were people, they might take some people fresh out of college, depending upon your degree. That's a bad idea, because you are in over your head. And you could come in with a scientific degree with less real-world experience because it's tough to recruit scientists to be FBI agents. And it's a real-world job, and you need the real-world time to be good at it.
Wow, that's fascinating. What do you think makes it more difficult to get scientists involved? Is there any particular reason?
Yeah, well, you know, sort of the mystique of the FBI is, you know, you run around throwing handcuffs on bad guys. Right. You know, maybe you're kicking down doors, maybe you're conducting interviews. A scientist, for example, Bureau needs metallurgists. That's an investigation. But if you become a metallurgist, you probably didn't envision digging through metal evidence to look for tool marks to connect a murderer to a crime scene. Right. So, you know, maybe it's it may be primarily a marketing issue. But for whatever reason, not a lot of scientists think about becoming FBI agents, although there's a big need for them. Right. Okay. So you're joining, and at that point, so you mentioned the qualifications. It's mostly real life based. Is that essentially the whole of the qualifications? Well, real life based, and then a clean record. I mean, you got to be able to pass the security clearance, and not just the security clearance, but you know, somebody's going to ask your neighbors whether or not you'd be a good FBI agent. Background investigations are not difficult investigations, but somebody might really like you and you might be really good friends, but they still don't want you to be an FBI agent. So, your family and friends are going to be very candid with the FBI investigators as to whether or not they think you should be an agent and why. Because in many cases, when there's a real serious crime problem in the United States, even in today's environment where the FBI is taking a lot of heat from the current president of the United States, when there's a crime problem, they're going to put the FBI on it.
Yeah.
And we all rely upon the FBI to sort of deal with that stuff for us. So, you have to basically have good core values, not get in a lot of trouble, be an honest human being. Maybe you might have experimented slightly a little bit with drugs. But I mean, if you were a hard party with drugs, you're not going to get into the FBI. Or if your friends loved you but couldn't trust you, you're not going to get into the FBI. So yeah, you got to kind of be a pretty solid citizen to get in.
Right. So it's a long vetting, or I guess an involved vetting process, so to speak.
It's a pretty involved process. It doesn't take that long, but you're going to have to provide a whole bunch of references to get in, and we're going to talk to your references. And your references, if they know you, and that's why you provided them, they're going to tell the truth about you.
Right. Well, that's good, honestly, and I think that's an interesting point. That someone can like you as a friend, but maybe they don't want you on the front line or something like that. So it's interesting.
Yeah. It's and that's the way it works out.
Wow. So at that point, were you put right as the lead international kidnapping negotiator, or were you working your way up to that?
No, that's a long road.
Okay.
I mean, first I was a member on a SWAT team.
Okay.
And if you're in SWAT or you're a negotiator or, you're a bomb tech or an evidence tech, or an undercover, any of those specialties, you do them as an additional duty. You got a day job as an investigator. You're assigned to a squad that's investigating crime, if you will. And if you're resident agency, you're investigating everything that comes through the door. When I was in Pittsburgh, I was more confined because we had a lot of squads and we had a lot of crime. So initially I worked foreign counterintelligence.
Okay.
Then when I went to New York, I was assigned to terrorism.
Wow.
And so, but when I was in Pittsburgh, I got on the SWAT team as an additional duty. I was a member of the SWAT team. Eventually kind of wear out. I mean, and it has to this day. I mean, I can't run. I can't, as an aerobic exercise, I can't go running because my knee won't put up with it.
Right.
So I thought, well, what else could I do? We had hostage negotiators. So I decided I'd try that. And that ended up being a journey getting on the team at all, because I was initially rejected. They said, no, unqualified. And I was unqualified at the time, but I asked how. There's an old saying, never take advice from somebody you wouldn't trade places with.
Right.
You should ask advice, but you don't take it from everybody. Like my dad didn't know nothing about being a hostage negotiator, so I'm not taking his advice on that stuff. He didn't know about how to do it.
Right.
So I got advice from a woman running the team, and I took it, and I got on the team as a result. I got on the team ahead of a bunch of other people. And then there was a bank robbery with hostages, which is a rare event. I mean, it happens in the movies all the time. In real life, bank robberies with hostages are rare.
Yeah.
Where the police surround the bad guys. Right. And I got there self-initiated. I wasn't called to go. The bank alarm went out. One of my buddies on the team came to my office, and I'm getting ready to sneeze, so.
It's okay.
Excuse me.
Bless you.
This guy came to my desk, and he said, hey, there's a bank robbery in Brooklyn with hostages. Let's go. We went.
Wow.
We showed up. Half of life, probably 80% of life is showing up. We showed up.
Yeah.
We were the first to show up. NYPD, FBI put a team together. NYPD commander in charge of the team, a guy named Hugh McGowan, brilliant dude, great guy. Put a NYPD negotiator on the phone first, put me in as his coach. We coached him as a team for a few hours. Lieutenant McGowan decided to swap out negotiators. I was next in line. He put me on the line. I'm very coachable.
Mm-hmm.
He gave me great coaching. I was also very prepared. You fall to your highest level of preparation.
Yeah.
I was prepared. I'd spent a lot of time on a suicide hotline. I was ready to go. I got one of the bank robbers out about 2.5 hours later, surrendered to me personally outside the bank.
Wow. And what was the tactic that ended up working for that first case or particular case?
Well, it was really, just really paying attention to what he was actually saying. And we did a really subtle thing. It was Lieutenant McGowan's idea. But the other thing we did was we made sure we controlled how each interaction ended.
Right.
People spend a lot of time making sure a first impression is good. The real power is making sure that the last impression is good.
That's true.
And Hugh made sure that we controlled the ending of each conversation. And as long as you're not determined to get in a cheap shot, like most people, when they're talking about the last word is a cheap shot.
Mm-hmm.
And so now everybody's fighting to get in the last word because we want it to be a cheap shot. Well, if you do the opposite, you make sure you get the last word in a positive way, that seeds the next interaction. You've actually taken care of the first impression on the next interaction. You've already taken it over. Nobody knows. And it was one of the things that Hugh had counseled me to, Lieutenant McGowan. When I got on the phone, he said, "Look, we got to get the upper hand back here. He's ending the calls. From now on, no matter what happens, you make sure you end the call."
Right.
And we slowly took over that, and we use that now as a business tactic in our business negotiations. We're very concerned with making sure every interaction ends the way we want it to, which is positive, but with us setting the stage by ending positively.
Yeah, I really like that because it's true. I like that. It takes care of the first impression the next time because you're already remembering the ending of the last interaction. That's
exactly
really interesting.
Right.
So
yeah.
In terms of that bank robbery incident, was that the first hostage situation you'd ever handled?
Yeah, it
Wow.
was. It was the first thing that I was involved in, and it was top tier job right off the bat. Most of them are not anywhere near that significant. So yeah, it was my first time out of the gate.
Wow, that's super fascinating. And I also read that you were involved in some investigations at the World Trade Center. Was this when the first bomb went off before the planes?
Yeah,
Okay.
back in the early '90s, it was the first attack.
Yeah, what was that experience like?
Well, we'd been working aspects of that case and hadn't connected all the dots yet. So when the Trade Center got hit, we had a fair amount of groundwork already laid, which is why it was solved so quickly.
Right.
And then what a lot of people don't realize is we immediately uncovered another group of terrorists that wanted to one-up the first guys. So the first guys, they bombed the Trade Center, and it was only one location. And of course, their intent all along was to knock down the towers. So the next guys, in order to one up the first guys, want to hit 4 locations. Right. And so that was pretty crazy for a while. We were on top of those guys. They had a lot of plans. They wanted to bomb 4 locations. They wanted to assassinate some politicians. They wanted to engage in a reign of terror.
Wow.
And we were on them the whole time, which was white knuckle time because you got to give them a little bit of rope. Because you got to gather evidence. You got to show that it's more than just a couple of bozos sitting around talking.
Right.
It's got to be more than talk. They got to show that they're capable of doing it by actually taking some action.
Right. Is that sort of because there's many sort of threats against people like in the United States? Is it that it has to be taken quite seriously for it to be on you guys' radar?
Yeah, well, and there's a lot of talk. I mean, the hard thing is we're a country that we're supposed to be founded on unlimited speech, free speech.
Yeah.
And so and that gives you the right to say stuff that other people don't like. And so there's some fine lines. You know, John O'Neill, the guy, one of the FBI agents that was killed in a 9/11. He used to say we live in a society of ordered liberty, you know, which liberty is unlimited. I mean, complete liberty is anarchy.
Right.
But ordered liberty, you try to put those two things together. And O'Neill talked about that a lot. And so, yeah, what the FBI takes a look at, we got to be really careful, because then, by definitions, you know, terrorism is political. And we've got a First Amendment, freedom of politics. So those are some fine lines that are difficult to walk.
Yes, definitely. So when you guys zero in on a group like that who was planning a follow-up to the World Trade Center's original bombings, do you guys go and make arrests at a certain point? Do you deport them from the country? How does it work after that?
Well, back then, you know, the idea was to gather evidence and arrest them, try them in civilian court. So the informant came to us, told us they were planning this. They had already begun to take action to implement some of their plans. So our informant said, hey, and they came to this guy because he said he was a bomb maker. So they came to him and they said, we'll make bombs. And so he gave them a garage to make bombs, and we wired the garage for audio and video, and we recorded these guys planning to blow stuff up. Wow. And we let them engage in that planning and in the gathering of materials. We probably watched them for about 2 months, and then we swooped in and put handcuffs on them.
Wow! And then at that point, they stay in America and they're dealt with.
Yeah, you know, absolutely. I mean, and they go to an American jail, face American justice, which is eminently fair. I mean, it's not a perfect system, but it's eminently fair. And they were fairly tried in a civilian court and sent to American jails.
Yeah. I think that makes sense. You know, they're doing the crimes on that soil. Might as well deal with it on that soil, right? Based on your expertise, and you know, obviously you've investigated the World Trade Center. What are your thoughts on the September 11th attacks? Do you feel like there's any sort of foul play there, or do you feel like things went down the way that they were described?
No, yeah, I know the guys that made those cases. I mean, they didn't care who did them. They just literally don't care. Want to get the guys that did them. And they got the right people. Yeah.
Okay. I really like that. Now, I did mention to you off the top that you were a listener-recommended guest here on the show. And I actually have some questions here from some fans of yours. This is a question from Tim Moriah. He says, "Hey, Chris Voss, my name is Tim, and I'm from Edmonton, Canada. I resell phones for a living and got a negotiation question for you. I have people that have phones for sale that reach out to me. My job is to close people on the lowest possible price. When I do that, there are times that no matter what I say, people are just so firm on their prices and they won't move down no matter what. Are there instances where this kind of stuff happens to you, when no matter what you try to say or do, people are so firm that there's no way of closing them to get what you want?"
Yeah, no, we don't expect to make every deal. I mean, even in the FBI, we used to talk about what's our best chance of success, not what's our guarantee of success. And so if you're talking about best chance of success, whether you're a hostage negotiator or whether you're buying phones, that implicit in that is that you won't make every deal, that you won't always be successful. Now, you maximize your success by treating people with respect, and it's really your manner. I mean, I can be a very hard bargainer without being a jerk. I can get my way without being a jerk. And chances are more likely that the nicer, so to speak, that I am, the more likely you are to make the deal with me. And some people will choose to not make a deal, not because they didn't like the deal, they didn't like how they were treated. They didn't like the tone of voice of the other side. They didn't like being treated like they were commodity or somebody to be exploited.
Right.
A lot of people will blow up a deal just because they didn't like the way you talk to them. I don't want to lose those deals. I don't want to ever lose a deal because the person didn't like the way I spoke to them. And consequently, we make a lot more deals. So, Tim was the guy's name, right?
Yeah.
Tim, you're going to make more deals. The nicer you are, being nice doesn't mean giving in. But the more respectful, more deferential, the more easier you are to deal with, the more deals you make.
I like that a lot. That's some good advice, and that sort of was the main idea behind some of the questions that were sent in. And I know that's a big, the main topic of your book, Never Split the Difference, essentially how the negotiation tactics bleed into real life. So I'm sure you find that there's a lot of crossover.
Oh, it's all the same because we're talking about, human nature dynamics.
Yeah.
We make deals based on, do we feel like we were treated fairly? Mm-hmm. That's our first criteria to whether or not we make a deal. Not how good the deal is, but do we feel that we got there in a fair process? And that's so common. We actually call fair the F word, the F-bomb, baby. Somebody drops the word fair in a negotiation, they have dropped the F-bomb. Wow. That's one, and it comes up in every deal. Somebody says, that's not fair. Or somebody says, I gave you a fair offer. I mean, the F-bomb gets dropped right and left, which means it's our first criteria for whether or not we make a deal.
So if they're saying that, you're not interested?
Saying which part? That they gave me a fair offer, or that I did something that wasn't fair?
Yeah, if they're saying, like, let's say I offered you a fair offer, is that a no-go, or is that someone you would like to work with?
Well, I gotta know. There's one or two reasons why you're gonna say to me, you gave me a fair offer. Mm-hmm. One is it's a manipulative tactic. The cutthroat negotiator knows if he says, I gave you a fair deal, I'm going to make you uncomfortable enough. You're going to be afraid that you're being unfair by saying no. And it's a short-term gain, long-term loss tactic. It works in a one-off situation. And in point of fact, very few things in life are one-offs.
Right.
Or a very small percentage are one-offs. I mean, Tim's negotiating phones. Mm-hmm. Those are one-offs.
Yeah.
But what happens if the guy that sold him the phone, his buddy knows, his buddy's got a phone? Is he going to make the referral? Mm-hmm. What's the referral pipeline? Let's say Tim sees everything as a one-off and he's a hard bargainer as a result. Well, 99 out of 100 of his other deals are not one-offs. Yeah. And he negotiates like, and everything like he negotiates with the phones. He's not going to make those deals because he's got to live with those people, and they're not going to like getting exploited. So short-term gain is usually long-term loss, and long-term loss is almost always more expensive.
Right, because it's like the return of the customer. In the end, you're going to make more if you have those good referrals.
Yeah, and you never know. I mean, like one of the students in my class at USC was really proud of the deal he made at Home Depot for cabinets. Mm-hmm. Now he's like, I'm only going to buy kitchen cabinets for this house once. So I'm going to kill this guy on a price. Salesman is at Home Depot working on commission, whatever.
Yeah.
Killed the guy on a price. But then there were installation issues. But then he had to go back to the same salesman to deal with the installation issues, to deal with the minor defects in the workmanship and the minor defects in the materials. Now he's going back to the guy that he slaughtered on a price. This salesman is not interested in helping him for free on anything, and even the stuff they charge him for is going to make it hard. So a lot of your deals that you look at as one-offs, they may turn into long-term relationships.
Oh yeah, that's very true. It's almost like interviews. There's even been people who I've interviewed. I figure we'll do it for an hour, and then months later we're still talking because it's just one of those things, right? I really like that. Yeah. That's fascinating. There was another question here, and this says, as an FBI hostage negotiator or any situations in life that needed negotiation, it says, were there times that no matter what you said in the book, you were not going to close a certain amount of people? Oh, so essentially this is pretty much the same question. Yeah, people are just really curious as to if you can always do it. But you've said you can't always close a deal. It's just not possible.
No, you can't always close it, but what you can do is you can get a real clear read in the very early stages of whether or not a deal is there at all. And we worked kidnappings back in 2004 was the first time Al Qaeda started chopping people's heads off. It was the same thing that ISIS was doing in 2012.
Right.
Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi was an Al Qaeda lieutenant in Iraq in 2004. That's where he learned all this head chopping nonsense. So, those were kidnappings that there was no deal to be had there. They grab a hostage and they say, all the Americans out of Iraq in 72 hours, or we cut off their head. I mean, even if the Americans wanted to leave Iraq, they couldn't get out in 72 hours.
Yeah.
So you got to know in advance, there's no deal to be had here. This is not a deal that the other side is going to make, and you have to treat it that way accordingly. Because actually, if you're going to get them to change their mind, I mean, you got to call them on their BS.
Yeah.
You got to say, you guys aren't here to make a deal. Right. And there are a lot of business negotiations like that also. So what you want to know up front is there a deal to be had, and is the deal with you? And there's a saying in sales, but it transfers to negotiations. It's not a sin to not get the deal. It's a sin to take a long time to not get the deal. That's why you got to find out early on what's possible.
So there's tells that you can pick up on very quick.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, there are a variety of tells. And a little bit is just saying like, hey, why me? What makes it a good idea to deal with me? Right. If they can't give you an answer to that right away, chances are there's no deal there.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I really appreciate your time, Chris. This has been fantastic. In closing, I guess if you could look back on your career, which has been lengthy, is there one situation that you can point to as like maybe the most high suspense situation or one of the most memorable situations that you've had?
Well, in my book, Never Split the Difference, one of the cases that was a low point, taught me a lot, and was a turning point. Your low points got to be turning points. There's nothing wrong with having low points.
Right.
The issue is whether or not they're turning points for you. It was a Burnham Sabero case in the Philippines, which ended up in a botched rescue attempt. 2 out of 3 remaining hostages were killed by friendly fire. I thought that we were going to get the hostages out about a month and a half earlier. They didn't come out. And we did a assessment of our methods, and we did everything to the best of our ability. And I was professionally my worst professional moment.
Wow.
But then I said, all right, so we're not good enough. We got to get better. When you find out you're not good enough, either you quit or you get better. I chose to get better. And since we did everything we knew how to do in law enforcement, we decided to go outside of law enforcement. That's when I started to collaborate with Harvard so I could learn from those guys. And that's, go somebody on the outside, raise the level of your game.
I like that. Always improving, always working. Mr. Voss, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you today. I want to remind everybody to go check out Never Split the Difference, the book. It's on Amazon. It's available everywhere. And, of course, check out blackswanltd.com for the Black Swan group. Tremendous group, tremendous content.
And, if I could add,
yeah,
we've got a newsletter that if you go to the website, you can sign up for the newsletter. The newsletter is free. It's a good price.
Yeah.
Short, sweet, concise, comes out every Tuesday morning. Actionable. Quick read, quick actionable stuff. You can implement it that day. And a lot of people get a long way just on the book and the newsletter alone.
Nice. I love that. I definitely encourage everyone to check out the newsletter. Mr. Voss, again, thank you so much. And we'll be sending everyone at Black Swan the link to this, and feel free to do whatever you want with the content.
Thanks, brother. Thank you very much. Very nice talking to you.
Take care.